Welcome into the inaugural episode of FCS Rundown with Criswell and the coach. I'm Josh Criswell, joined as always by my co-host, the coach, Gene Clemons. Gene's been covering the FCS for over a decade. I'm a little bit newer to the game, coming up on about 3 years, but a lot of FCS experience here, but most importantly, a lot of FCS action to dive into.
Absolutely, lots of action. I'm really looking forward. This is going to be almost a make or break week for a lot of teams, so definitely ready to get into it.
So, if you don't know Gene already, make sure to follow him on Twitter. And also, he's been doing a great job covering the FCS landscape with a little bit of a betting angle for the Athletics. So make sure to subscribe, check out his work on there. Myself, I'm the Sam Houston beat writer, cover the Southland Conference as well as the FCS from a national perspective, vote on the postseason awards, take part in the weekly top 25 voting. So, we're both right in the mix of everything. And I guess we'll start it off with a little bit of an unfortunate topic. And that's the fact that, whenever you texted some show topics to me, you said COVID kind of ravaging through the Missouri Valley Football Conference. And now I guess we can kind of add CAA to the mix with, I think it was Albany pulling the plug on its season earlier today. But Gene, my first thoughts I have for you is you have all this upheaval. You have teams that aren't really playing equal amount of games, equal quality teams. How do you go about determining an at-large bid for these conferences?
Well, I don't envy anybody with having to make those selections. I think you'll see the selection committee really lean on some of those teams that are tried and true. You may not see some of the teams kind of have an opportunity to get in where they may not have gotten in other years because they're having a good season or a good season comparatively. I think this year you'll see them lean back on some of those teams that have had postseason success, even if there may be somebody with a supposed better regular season record, because nothing's going to be even this year.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's kind of the case in both of those leagues, because you have sort of, if you were entering the spring season and someone asked you, who are the top two dogs, you'd probably say number 1, North Dakota State, and number 2, James Madison. I know NDSU had a unexpected hiccup earlier in the season, but, they're right back where they are, find themselves, I think in the top 5 of the rankings. So both of those teams kind of knocking on the door of a number 1 seed. But if they don't get that number 1, or I guess if they don't get that auto bid from their conference, it's going to be interesting. Because I think right now we've got 4 one-loss teams in the Missouri Valley, and some of those teams aren't going to end up being able to play a full schedule. And one of those being Missouri State, who's kind of come out of nowhere as of late, have 1 loss to the Bison. And then other than that, they've been rolling, have a couple of big upset wins. So you've got 4 teams in a league that, depending on how everything goes, I know it sounds crazy with only a few at-large bids to hand out, but there's 3 Missouri Valley teams that are making a case to make the playoffs.
Well, I think you're going to see 3 Missouri Valley teams make the playoffs. I think you have an opportunity to see 3 Big Sky teams. So it's going to be really interesting. 2 teams from the CAA. I think right now Delaware is trending toward the team that could make the postseason. It doesn't help them that they're probably going to lose their game this week versus Albany. James Madison is undefeated. They haven't been impressive except for last week, but undefeated James Madison, after what they've done, they'll probably be in again. And so then it becomes like, what about these other conferences that may normally get 2 bids? Will they get squeezed because preference will be given to the Big Sky and to the Missouri Valley because they kind of deserve it? They've been the gold standard over the last few years.
And you bring up other conferences. I guess that kind of spins us towards our next topic, and that's Sam Houston. One of the teams in the Southland Conference, if the season ended today, would secure that auto bid, and really hadn't even been close outside of their first game of the season against Southeastern Louisiana. But they're another league. You've got Nichols right there, who can't really afford another loss. They should win the rest of their games, but you don't really know they're another loss you think eliminates them from the postseason picture. Then Incarnate Word, went off to a hot start, then got blown out last week by Nichols. Now they need to upset Sam the final week of the season to have any hope at all. But talking about the Bearcats, I mean, I follow this team closer than anybody, but I want to get your perspective, Gene. It seems like there's a mixed reaction. There's some people that are really buying into the Bearcats. They believe that this explosive offense can hold up in the postseason. But there's also been some doubters. I'm curious, what are your overall thoughts whenever you think about this year's Sam Houston Bearcat team?
The only issue I have, I believe that Sam Houston's offense is for real, but the problem is that they haven't really played any great defenses or any good defenses. Most of those defenses that they've played, they're going to give up points to anybody. That's a decent offense, as we saw last week with the 100 million points that were given up, in that Nichols and Carter Word contest. So how good is the offense comparative to defenses that will be catered to stop that offense? Or at least not, I shouldn't even say stop, but keep them from scoring 50 something points a game. I think that if they get into a shootout with, say, like an Eastern Washington, they get beat. I think if they get into a shootout with the North Dakota State, probably getting beat. And so it's like you think they're good. I know that they're good. They're going to be a tough out for anybody in the playoffs, but I think it'll matter what type of seed will they get, and if they get a bad seed or a seed that's lower where they have to take on one of these other teams that also possess a high-powered offense but better defense, will we see that be the great equalizer? That's what we won't know, and we probably won't know that until we get to the playoffs.
Yeah, and that's kind of the recurring theme with everyone I talk to about this, especially given, Sam Houston's well-documented struggles once you get to the later rounds of the postseason. And I think this year's team is a little bit different. I think the biggest thing is last year they kind of proved, they were top 8 in the country and I think 12 different categories defensively, and they bring back everyone from that group. I think, out of teams that have played 3 or more games, the number 4 rushing defense in the country. So I think that gives them a big boost. They have 3 guys that are FBS caliber players starting on the D line, but you brought up a great point. They aren't going to face a really stout defense until you get to the playoffs, because like you mentioned, Nichols probably going to be the toughest defense they'll face all year, and they gave up 45 points to, albeit an electric Incarnate Word team, but nonetheless it's still 45 points against a UIW team. So it's definitely a question. I think one of the other things that works in the Bearcats' favor, though, is the plethora of weapons they have. Everyone knows
all
about
over.
Yeah, it's like, everyone knows about junior quarterback Eric Schmid, who people don't realize this. He runs a 4.4 40. So you've got a quarterback that's faster than almost every defensive player that's on the field. And then you look at who he has to distribute the ball to. Jaquez Ezard, kind of an outside looking in, but a guy that's definitely in the running for that Walter Payton Award. I think he has over 500 yards and 6 touchdowns on only 17 touches this year. So, he's putting up about 30, 35 yards every time he touches the ball. But I talked to head coach Casey Keeler earlier this week, and the thing that he really likes is that teams can't say, oh, we're going to go and just focus everything on Jaquez Ezard, because they're only throwing him the ball 4 or 5 times a game. He's just making big plays when it happens. So you got, Noah Smith and Ramon Jefferson in the backfield. You have Ife Adeyi, who is up there with probably one of the top 5 to 10 fastest players in the FCS. D. Bowens, Chandler Harvin. So, they've got, if not more weapons than anybody, they're right up there with it as far as the FCS skill players go.
And I would tell you that I don't think any defense in the country is going to shut them down. I just don't know if they're going to be. It'll be interesting to see. I like the defense. I think it was telling that Sam Houston's defense was able to just obliterate Nichols. I don't know if that was a snowball effect and maybe things kind of went wrong, because Nichols they have a lot of talented players on their team, but it was very telling. I'll be looking forward to seeing what happens in another week when they go up against another offense that can put up a lot of points. We'll see where they stand then. But offensively, I don't have any concerns with them. I think that whomever has to go up against them, it's going to be a rough night for them. It's just we know nobody game plans better than North Dakota State. Nobody game plans better than James Madison. Those two teams come up with game plans that are tailor made, and then you've got this. Is the Big Sky really the Big Sky this year? They seem to be going through a little bit of flux, but the one thing we know for certain is that Weber will play great defense. Apparently, UC Davis is now a great defensive team, and Eastern Washington's going to score with anybody. It doesn't really matter who you are.
Yeah, definitely going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Those two conferences, specifically the Southland and the Big Sky. Keeping it with the Southland, moving on to our best bet segment where we give our favorite bet on the board this week. For me, and I promise we're going to get away from the Southland here in a moment, but I got to go with Nichols, 14.5-point favorites against McNeese. You just look at what Nichols was able to do last week. Obviously, everyone knows that they got blown out 71-17 by Sam Houston a couple of weeks ago, but they came back and made a statement in their first game since then, put up 75 points, beat UIW by 30. And so I just have a little bit of trouble, a McNeese team that, they lost by 18 themselves to Incarnate Word. So I know obviously different teams, different times in the season, but I like Nichols being able to beat the Cowboys by more than 2 touchdowns. So give me the 14.5, especially when you have a team like Nichols, who's not only fighting for an at-large bid, but they're also fighting for seeing. And as our producer, David Graff, just informed me, that line's all the way down to 13.5 now. So that makes me like that even more. Nichols isn't going to let up in this game. They're trying to make a statement that they're a potential top 10 seed despite that ugly loss. So that's my best bet of the week. Gene, what do you got?
My best bet of the week, I think, is a lot of people are going to look at it a more difficult game, but I like VMI under versus ETSU. I think VMI's defense has been really special this year. They've kept their team in it. VMI's offense is good, but ETSU's, the East Tennessee State, their defense is really good as well. So you've got a really good defensive team that doesn't play the greatest offense. Then you have a really good defensive team that plays better offense. It just feels like it's going to be a game that goes underneath. Both teams played Furman, who is a similar team to both of those teams in talent, and they both of those games went under. So I expect to see something very similar when both of those teams match up, especially because they'll be tight, because this is going to be something that, this is a championship on the line type of game. And so neither one of those teams are going to want to fret. Neither one of those teams are going to want to blink first. And I think that means it's going to be a defensive struggle, especially impressed with the red zone defenses of both teams and being able to keep people off the board. I think that's something that's going to really play in their favor and keep that number under the 47.5 points.
Let's get into some rapid fire picks on some of the biggest games from this weekend. Let's start with that VMI game that Gene just mentioned there. VMI 5-0 against the spread this season. They're -1.5 versus East Tennessee State. What do you guys think?
I guess since I think we know, or at least we know where you're going with the over/under on this one. I'll go ahead and say that we're going to talk about our parlays of the weekend, where we give a little 3-game pick for the listeners. But I love VMI at -1.5, as David mentioned, 5-0 against the spread. And I don't think that's going to stop this week. I like the fact that they're kind of the unusual military academy that utilizes the air raid offense. So that tells me that they're going to be able to put up points, even, with them losing their star quarterback, Reese Udinsky. Seth Morgan stepped in. He had a little bit of a rough start his game when he was kind of thrown to the fire at the end there, whenever VMI still pulled out the win, but, got that full week of practice as the number one guy. And he went out there, lit up, name slipping my mind, but, lit up the opponent for over 300 yards in a big win for the Keydets. So I'm going 1.5 easy right there. I know it wasn't really rapid fire, but Gene, why don't you take it away from here?
I think the Keydets definitely take care of business. Their offense is better than ETSU's defense. Both defenses are very similar. I like the air raid. You won't see them being able to prepare for it as much. Give me VMI. Give me VMI, and I'll give up the 1.5. I was like, wait a minute.
I was going to say, all right, both of you guys on VMI. What about Wofford -8 versus the Citadel?
It's a tough one, but I think I'm going with Wofford to not only snap their 3-game winning streak, but I'm going to say that they're going to cover the 8 points against the Citadel team that's coming off a 48-point loss.
Absolutely. I think that Wofford gets back on track. The Citadel they have played some teams tough, but when it starts to go bad, they don't have an offense that can put a Band-Aid on anything. I think that Wofford will cover that 8 without any problems.
All right. How about Austin P -3.5 versus Murray State?
Well, my lock of the week on the Bet the FCS podcast last week was Austin P +10.5 against Jacksonville State. Not only did they cover that, but they picked up the upset, shut down the number 7 team in the country. And, they did that without their best player in Brian Sneed. I'm taking them in the 3.5 points against a Murray State team that struggled with Eastern Illinois last week.
It's hard to give a team their first 0. So with that in mind, I have to give a little bit of credence to Murray State at home. I think that Austin P wins. I don't think Austin P covers. Give me those points. I'll take Murray State.
All right.
A little bit of a hangover after that Jacksonville State game, because that was shocking to me.
No doubt. I think that was shocking to everyone. Even though I was on them, I didn't think they'd win it. I liked them to lose by about 6 or 7.
Well, let's stay in the South here. South Carolina State versus Alabama State. It's a pick'em.
It's tough. You don't really know a lot about either of these teams just with the way that the season's unfolded. I think each of them maybe has 2 games on their record right now, but I'm going with Alabama State. I like everyone, of course, saw what they did against Jackson State a couple of weeks ago. And then looking at South Carolina State, they're a team that I had high hopes for. I think I had them in the top 25 in my preseason ballot, but they've kind of underwhelmed, and they got blown out by Alabama A&M to start things off. So in a pick 'em, I'm going to roll with Alabama State.
Yeah, we haven't seen enough of South Carolina State. I don't think that they're going to be ready for a tough competition because they haven't had an opportunity to compete. I'll take Alabama State. Go with the home team in this one.
All right, we move to the Missouri Valley Football Conference. One of the few games that survived this weekend, Youngstown -10 versus Western Illinois.
I like Youngstown -10. Western Illinois, they've been, for lack of a better term, one of the worst teams in the FCS this season. And then you look at Youngstown, they're a team that started off a little bit rocky, had some tough losses. Then they nearly upset South Dakota State, lost by 2 there, and then came out really big their next game, beaten South Dakota by 18. So I like the Penguins to kind of keep it rolling and, win by 2 touchdowns against Western Illinois.
Yeah, I'm gonna take Youngstown in this. I was a little hesitant with them being on the road, but if you look at the competition that they've played this year, all of the top teams in the Valley that they've been able to, kind of hang with or even have an opportunity to beat, and then to get it done last week in such a convincing fashion, I think that we'll see them roll and kind of keep that thing moving forward this week versus a Western Illinois team that just hasn't been competitive for most of the season.
All right, we head west, not all the way west, but pretty far west. Idaho versus Idaho State in the Battle of the Domes. The Vandals are -5.5.
Give me the Vandals and the 5.5 points. They're clinging to their playoff hopes. And, I keep going back to this. If they can beat a top 25 Eastern Washington team by 7, why can't they do that against Idaho State?
Absolutely. Idaho knows that this is a must win, especially with UC Davis playing so well. Weber State still being Weber State, and then Eastern Washington, they can't afford to drop another one. I'll take Idaho.
Our final quick pick of the week here: UC Davis -2 versus Eastern Washington.
Not only do I like Eastern Washington +2 here, I like them as the outright winner. It's going to be a tough one because obviously you have UC Davis, one of the more impressive defenses in the country this spring, but I'm going to go with Eastern Washington. Eric Berrier, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He's a guy who might be one of those candidates for the Walter Payton Award here in a few weeks. So give me Eastern Washington and definitely give them with the 2 points.
And I'm going to go the opposite way. I like UC Davis in this. I think that when you look at Eastern Washington versus good competition on the road, what they did at Idaho tells me that the on-the-road offense isn't the same as the at-home offense. UC Davis has shown that they can perform at a high level on defense versus the top-notch teams in the Big Sky, what they did to Weber State, what they did to Idaho. I think they've got enough to keep it under the over-under, and I think they go ahead and cover that 2 points.
Well, that wraps it up for our rapid-fire picks of the weekend. But before we go, I guess as we're going to close out every show from here on out, we're going to give everybody out there a little bit of a 3-team parlay. If you want to ride with us, put a little bit more money where your mouth is, and win the big bucks right here. Gene, I'll let you start it off. Who do you have going for your parlay of the week?
So I'm a big fan of big spreads and overs. I think that a lot of times, or over-unders, I think a lot of times when you look at a big spread, if you like the favorite in a big spread, there's more than likely a chance that they're going to go over because they're going to give up some garbage time touchdowns that usually does a lot to push an over-under. If you think that the underdog is going to cover the big spread, what you're essentially saying is that those people are going that big spread favorite's not going to score enough points to be able to cover it. So if they're not going to score enough points to cover the spread, they're probably not going to score enough points to cover the over. Well, back down to your neck of the woods, Sam Houston State's going to put all kinds of foot, this week. I like them to not only beat Northwestern State, I like them to beat them. I like the over. I think that the over will probably be, in the books by the third quarter at some point. I can't believe they keep putting these Southland Conference games under 70 points. It's almost like Vegas isn't watching. Thank you. I'll take those two. And then I will add on to it is my UC Davis under with Eastern Washington. That's one that I just don't think that UC Davis is going to give up enough points to have that go over. So give me Sam Houston State and the over, UC Davis under 3-pick, put a little something on it, and then enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that last one at all, but now that you mentioned it, I really like that UC Davis under. I might have to tack that on and make this a 4-teamer. But, for me, I'm going back to the Southland well for the exact reason that you mentioned. We talked about it on Twitter a little bit last weekend, but it's like Vegas isn't watching these Southland games at all, especially when it comes to these over-unders. I think Sam covers the 66.5 with Northwestern State easily. Not only do the Bearcats have an explosive offense, ranks top in the country with almost 60 points a game, but then you also have a Northwestern State team who has a really explosive running back. Scooter Adams, I think, is the name. So he's a guy who put up over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns his last game out there. So I like the promise of that one to get closer to the 80s than the 60s as far as the point total goes. I also like Nichols McNeese. Love that over at 58.5. The way that McNeese's defense has played at times this season, especially kind of in the secondary, with Nichols not only having a dual threat quarterback in Lindsey Scott that's also knocking on the door of the Walter Payton Award discussion. They have NFL caliber receiver, I guess you'd say, in Dejon Dixon. Not sure if they're going to get running back Julian Gums back yet, but honestly, with those two alone at the receiver position, along with the other weapons they have, just don't see a way that stays under 60 points. And then to close it out, going to go with the team that hasn't disappointed us against the spread all season, and that's VMI. Like I said, I think that 1.5 points, it's crazy that you can have a team that's covered the spread for 5 games in a row, and you're only giving them 1.5 points in a game where, they're going out there to win a conference championship this week. So a complete culture rebuild after that winless season a couple years ago. And I like the Keydets to go out there, get it done, and lock up that conference championship. So give me the Sam Houston Northwestern State over at 66.5, the Nichols McNeese over at 58.5. And honestly, I like both of those all the way up to 70 almost. And then also, of course, VMI -1.5 against Eastern Tennessee State University. I think both me and Eugene, we've gave the listeners out there some winners for this weekend.
Absolutely. And I love that, I love that Nichols McNeese over. I just can't understand how they keep putting these things under. I'm really bummed about Albany. I hope everybody is safe up there, obviously, but I was really looking forward because Delaware's been playing well. I thought that was going to be a really good game for Delaware. So I'm bummed that that's not there for if you're a betting person, but here's hoping that everything is okay with Albany.
Absolutely. We've been listening to FCS Rundown with Criswell and the coach. I'm Josh Criswell. He's Gene Clemons. It's our first episode, so still getting out there on all the different podcasting platforms. But, we'll send out the link and just keep checking back. Over these next couple of weeks, we'll be out there on everything you like to listen to your podcast on.
5 stars. Give us 5 stars for sure.
No doubt. 5-star reviews, and also make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We'll talk to you next time.